When I first read Fury, I was struck by the similarity between Reed and the famous anti-hero of Alfred Bester's Tiger, aka The Star's My Destination, namely Gully Foyle. There was a kind of fire and flash in Kuttner's writing which really took me back to Bester, and from then onwards I've seen Kuttner and his collaborator and wife C.L. Moore as the key stylists of the Golden Age. Jack Williamson, born 1908, USA. The Legion of Time, 1938. It is 1927, and Denny Lanning is suddenly confronted by a vision of a beautiful girl in white holding a stupendous crystal in which she reveals a utopian city of the future. After she warns our hero that a woman of malevolent aspect will shortly appear to tempt him, he indeed experiences another manifestation when an equally bewitching yet martial maiden in red armour materializes before his astonished eyes. Both women represent different possible futures for Earth, and Lanning is the fulcrum upon which reality itself will pivot. Each scenario exists only as a probability, and Lanning's actions will determine if the civilization of the Lady in White or the dystopia of the Scarlet Siren will prevail. 10 years later, while flying a plane over China in the war against Japan, Lanning is about to perish when an uncanny ship coalesces out of nowhere. The Cronion is crewed by a legion of dead men travelling into the alternate futures of Earth along the geodesic arcs of probability. Lanning is about to commit himself to the final terrible battle that will decide which world shall triumph and which woman will be his. Although it is far from being one of Williamson's best written works, The Legion of Time has a raw vitality and the entertainment value typical of its time. More significantly, it extrapolates a theory that was later conceived by a physicist in the 1950s. Hugh Everett proposed the parallel worlds hypothesis to account for some of the vagaries of quantum mechanics, similar to that described in Williamson's book. Science writer John Gribbin has praised Williamson's early understanding of quantum theory and the latter's command of the ideas as impressive. Although social SF often yields prescient metaphors for changes sparked by the evolution of technology, cases of hard SF actually anticipating fundamental theories concerning the nature of reality itself are rare, hence my belief that The Legion of Time is a seminal book. Williamson continued to write in the genre regularly until his death. He was the final survivor, as it were, of the golden age of magazine SF, providing a sense of continuity to the field since the 1920s. Another favourite Williamson of mine is The Humanoids, preceded by a magnificent short story called With Folded Hands, and that's what I'm going to talk about in the next segment of the video. There was in addition a trade paperback which included both of these stories. These stories have an affinity with Asimov's early robot stories, as you shall see. In With Folded Hands, a small-time robot vendor is meditating on how poorly his business is going when unexpectedly competition opens up in his neighbourhood. A new organisation with new tech, tiny, shiny, sleek robots. With the humanoids in human society, all pain and all fear are assuaged and banished. Everything is made safe, but at what cost? The cost is freedom of action, for within their care, human beings have so little freedom because they are endlessly overprotected. Cosseted like babies, human beings no longer have any freedom to do anything remotely dangerous to their physical bodies or their mental health. This is the world of the humanoids, in which the only response is to sit with folded hands. As SF writer Emma Newman pointed out in her book After Atlas, with convenience something is lost, and freedom is what is lost under the humanoids. The sequel to With Folded Hands, the novel The Humanoids, goes further and deeper, but it's a less satisfying work for me. When I read it, it reminded me of a children's book. It has a young girl as a central character, and this is one of the things that marks some golden age SF. Similarly, Slan has a young boy as a character, and we see this time and time again where adolescent wish fulfillment is brought to the fore. Tom Dish wrote about this in an essay called The Embarrassments of Science Fiction, in which he suggests that SF might actually be a form of children's literature. With Folded Hands and the Humanoids are, no doubt, important contributions to the early evolution of the concept of AI in SF. We read all the time in the newspapers, and we see in the mass media, on PCs, on TV, what have you, about the concerns currently about artificial intelligence. And yet, with Folded Hands and the Humanoids, show that it might not be the destructive elements that we draw from things like Terminator and Harlan Elson's I have no mouth but I must scream. Sometimes it may be more subtle, and that's usually the way things turn out with SF speculation. You get the high melodrama. In the real world, it usually tends out to be quieter and more insidious and more subtle, but nonetheless there. It's true that the Golden Age really is full of embarrassments in a literary sense. There is some clunky writing and some childish sort of characters and childish stories and immature tropes and what have you. But at the same time, it does have a raw energy and a willingness to look to the future, which was largely absent in mainstream fiction. Admittedly, the few quality works of SF from outside genre fiction, like 1984, really sort of put these things in the shade. But nonetheless, because of their wider impact on society as a whole later on and their continued relevance, the Golden Age is still well worth revisiting. And it's also context, as I always say, history. You can't understand SF or anything where it is now without understanding the history of where it's come from. And it's good fun too. Fury, 1947, by Henry Kuttner, born 1914, died 1958, the USA. Fury is set in the 27th century, 600 years since Earth was vaporized by a nuclear chain reaction. Humanity survives in ornate undersea keeps beneath the oceans of Venus, unable to tame the brutal surface that teems with deadly life forms. The keeps have stagnated, evolving elaborate feral structures ruled by the high-caste genetically modified immortals, many of whom are so nostalgic for the long-past local wars waged by the mercenary free companions. The spirit necessary to transcend the stifling decadence of the keeps exists only in two men: the idealist Robin Hale, seeking to conquer the unclaimed land to construct a spaceport, and the ruthless Sam Reed, a squat, bellicose plebeian whose immortal birthright has been cunningly concealed from him. On discovering how he has been misled by the elite, Reed responds with a blazing ire that neither Hale nor the remainder of Venusian society will escape. Even better than Fury is its prequel, Clash by Night, which is a novella. The evidence seems to suggest that both Fury and Clash by Night were written with Moore, and Moore seems to have a predominant voice in the colour of both of them, though the plotting and the action are more reminiscent of Kuttner's Mutant, which is a more action-driven title. Kuttner and Moore dominated Astounding magazine throughout the 40s, producing scores of sparkling short stories under a plethora of pseudonyms, both writers having prior enjoyed very successful solo careers before their marriage in 1940s. Since then, scholars have spent thousands of hours researching their oeuvres in attempts to separate their efforts from their individual works. Although Fury has long been solely credited to Kuttner, it's well known that the novel was a full collaboration. Although its tautness is characteristic of Kuttner, the often livid bloom of the prose marks more sensual presence. Arguably, Fury is an influence on Bester's amoral Übermenschen of the 1950s, Ben Reich of The Demolished Man, and Gully Foyle. Fury also exerted an influence over the new wave indirectly when William S. Burroughs lifted and dropped unedited, fully credited sections of Fury into the text of his novel The Ticket That Exploded. Burroughs' recurrent obsession with horrible physical addictions ministered by obscene alien creatures reflects Fury's lethal fauna. Moore's influence over Burroughs is clear here, because from the very beginning of her career, in Shamblo, published in Weird Tales in 1933, we see Northwest Smith, the rogue spacer, almost enslaved to Shamblo, an alien with an addictive yet destroying presence. Alone, Kuttner and Moore were both marvellous writers, but together they were probably the finest team in the history of SF collaboration. Arguably, Pohl and Kornbluth were as good, but for my money, I prefer the lyricism and the darkness of Moore, and the wit and the cutting plotting of Kuttner, the energy that's there. And they precede both. Obviously, Pohl and Kornbluth were active, but Kuttner and Moore started collaborating earlier, and they developed their oeuvre. And as I say, they dominated Astounding through their pseudonyms Lewis Paget and Lawrence O'Donnell. It really is simply stunning material.